Michelle will be around to catch with questions on that really important talk. Big fires and baby trees, how do they intersect? It's a very interesting question for us all. The next very interesting question is going to be about the idea of reburns. And I think that fits in very nicely with the idea of living with fire, because we know we're not done. And these areas that have burned will probably burn again. And Jenna Morris with the University of Washington is going to help us understand that with her talk on impacts of forest structure and fire severity on reburn potential in Western Cascadia. So help me bring Jenna to the stage.
Hi everyone, thanks for sticking around in this really exciting session that I'm being the bookend on. As Cheryl mentioned, my name is Jenna Morris. I am a graduate student in the Harvey Lab at the University of Washington, and I'm really grateful to be able to share with you some preliminary findings from my dissertation work exploring the impacts of forest structure and burn severity on reburn potential in the region. So I'd like to acknowledge that this work is in collaboration with my co-authors, Madison Laughlin, Liliana Rangel-Parra, Dan Donato, Josh Holofsky, and my advisor, Brian Harvey. Just like to take a moment to acknowledge and sincerely thank all of the support from my collaborators and partners, the people who have been funding this work, my lab mates, as well as the many field technicians who have helped us out over the last couple summers, and without whom this work would not be possible. So thank you to you all. And a big reason why many of us are here at this symposium this week is that within the last decade, recent fires have burned more than 500,000 hectares west of the Cascade Crest in Washington and northern Oregon, referred to here as Western Cascadia. In this region on the map, the region is shaded in blue, with the gray areas representing area burned in this region between 1984 and 2021, with the largest fires occurring within the last decade or so. In this region, forests are typically characterized by high severity, infrequent fire regimes, driven by climate and weather conditions, with those largest fire events being driven by these east winds that promote rapid and extensive fire spread. And until recently, there have been few opportunities to study post-fire forest response in the region due to the infrequent nature of fire events. However, these recent fires have created a chance to actually study contemporary fire effects and better predict future forest dynamics in the region. So while the research is limited, existing studies on post-fire vegetation response in the region have shown that generally, high-severity fires foster biodiversity through the creation of structurally complex early cereal habitats dominated by non-tree species. Studies have also shown that typically we've found a pretty prompt and abundant tree regeneration response following high-severity fires in this region. And I'll just mention that if you're interested in either of these two dimensions, be sure to check out the recordings from yesterday's lightning talks by Madison Laughlin and Liliana Rangel-Parra if you weren't able to tune in live. They're both studying these dimensions in a lot greater detail than I'll be covering today. However, growth and recovery of these live fuels may influence how one fire changes the probability and timing of reburning in subsequent fires. Under climate change, warmer and drier conditions may increase the potential of burning in these early cereal habitats where we're seeing vegetation and tree regeneration recover rapidly. So when thinking about reburns, a lot of our understanding comes from drier forest systems characterized by more frequent fuel-limited fire regimes, or systems characterized by much lower levels of productivity, whereas insights are missing on the drivers of reburn potential in more climate-limited fire regimes, higher productivity forests that we have over here in Western Cascadia. Thus, mechanisms and impacts of reburns are not fully understood in this region, due to limited data on past fire events, presenting a critical knowledge gap. So as some presentations shared yesterday, there is historical precedence for these areas reburning following initial fires. So this map is showing area burned in the 2020 fires, shown here in red, as long as area burned in known historical fires from the early 20th centuries, including the Columbia and Yakult burns shown in blue, as well as the 1933 Tillamook burns shown in pink. Zooming in, here we have the Yakult burn on the top and the Tillamook burn on the bottom. These figures are showing reburns that happened in the decades following these initial fires. For example, 15 partial reburns within the 50 years following the Yakult burn, as well as 5 partial reburns within 20 years following the Tillamook burn. So clearly, historical evidence has shown that these forests have a tendency to reburn following an initial fire. So given these dynamics, a key objective of my dissertation work is actually focused on addressing uncertainties in the drivers of post-fire reburn potential in the region. And we're looking at this question in a few different dimensions, including how reburn potential is influenced by forest structure and fire dynamics, as well as how different types and timing of different management interventions, such as harvest activities or fuel treatments, might impact reburn potential. For this talk, I'll just be focusing on the first question, but please come find me if you're interested. I would love to chat about thoughts on the second question later. So to think about answering this question of how is reburn potential in this region influenced by pre-fire stand age and burn severity, we can take a look at this schematic of stand successional development over time since fire in the region, increasing in age from left to right. We can imagine that the effects of fire are going to differ greatly by the structures present at the time of fire, as well as the severity of fire experienced, with important implications for the post-fire fuel profiles and reburn potential. Thus, both of these factors become really important predictor variables in our analyses. So to lay out our general expectations, focusing on fuel profiles as one important component of the reburn question, we expect total fuel loads to increase with pre-fire stand age, given that older stands have more biomass at the time of fire. We expect an opposite relationship of total fuel loads with burn severity due to greater combustion of available biomass in higher severity stands. For live and dead fuel load, we expect a positive trend with pre-fire stand age, again, due to the dynamic balance of growth and decay of fuels over time. And we'd expect an opposite trend with burn severity between live and dead fuels as fires generally convert live fuels into dead fuels. So getting into a brief look at our data collection and analysis methods. In this broad collaborative project that many folks in the lab so far have talked about, we've been establishing a network of 165 post-fire monitoring plots across 8 of the notable recent West Side fires, shown here in this map. Our 1-hectare plots are stratified by both pre-fire stand age, binned into young, mid-serial, and late serial classes, as well as by burn severity, stratified into unburned, low, and high severity classes. For my analyses, I'll just be focusing on a subset of these plots from the following 4 fires, shown here in red, including the 2017 Norse Peak and Eagle Creek fires, as well as the 2020 Big Hollow and Riverside fires. This table shows the breakdown of all these different strata combinations for the 88 total plots that are included in this analysis. So we were able to sample a pretty good representation of all of these combinations, except for young stands burned at low severity, which we were not able to find and sample. So those will not be represented. To characterize reburn potential in the field, we measured surface and canopy fuel profiles 2 to 4 years post-fire in each of these 1-hectare plots using standard methods. Surface fuel profiles included biomass of fine and coarse woody fuels broken into their different size classifications, as well as ground fuel depths of litter and duff, all measured within planar intercept Brown's transects. We also measured the biomass of live woody and herbaceous understory vegetation to characterize the live fuel profiles in circular subplots, using species and region-specific allometric equations to convert these measures into estimates of biomass. Our canopy fuel profiles included crown biomass, available canopy fuel load, canopy bulk density, canopy base height, canopy cover, of all our live and dead standing trees, again, using allometric equations and published fire behavior thresholds to convert these field measures into biomass estimates. To compare these different fuel profile components across our different strata, we used generalized linear models to predict our fuel load components as a function of both of those categorical predictor variables, pre-fire stand age and burn severity. Again, each binned into those 3 different classes: young, mid-serial, and late serial pre-fire stand ages, unburned, low, and high severity burn severity classes. And before diving into our results, just a quick reminder of our expectations. We would expect total and live fuel load to increase with pre-fire stand age and decrease with burn severity, and dead fuel loads to increase with both of these predictors. So now I'd like to get into some of the highlights and preliminary findings from this work. I want to take a moment to walk us through the format of these figures, which will be the same for each of the response variables that I'll be presenting. So each of these figures has fuel load on the x-axis. Each of the columns represents a different response variable. In this instance, fine woody debris on the left, coarse woody debris on the right. Each of our panels represents a different pre-fire stand age, increasing from our young stands on the bottom row up to our late serial stands on the top row. And then within each of those panels, we have burn severity on the y-axis, increasing from unburned on the bottom to high severity on the top. So starting with surface fuels, again, here we have our fine fuels on the left and coarse fuels on the right. Fine fuels being our 1, 10, and 100-hour surface fuels, coarse fuels being our larger 1,000-hour fuels. The colored circles and lines on these plots are the model predicted means and 95% confidence intervals, with the gray dots representing our actual plot values from each of our replicates in these strata. Overall, we saw a positive effect of pre-fire stand age on total surface fuel loads, with older stands having greater surface fuel loads for both our fine and coarse woody debris. This matched our expectations, giving these older stands having more biomass at the time of fire. We saw a negative effect of burn severity, with burn stands having less surface fuel loads than our unburned stands. Again, this made sense given greater combustion of available fuels in higher severity stands. There appears to be the relationship between burn severity and fuels appears to be more linear for our smaller fine fuels than for our larger coarse fuels, which may be due to coarse fuels requiring a longer time to actually develop and grow larger trees that can then be made into our coarse surface fuel loads, whereas fine fuels are pretty ubiquitous across stand development. And we saw that the strength of the relationships between pre-fire stand age and burn severity on each of these categories differed by the different fuel size components. So I'd like to dive into those a little bit, focusing first on our smaller fine fuels. Here we have our smallest 1-hour fuels on the left, 10-hour fuels in the middle, and 100-hour fuels on the right. And we saw that the strength of the positive effect of pre-fire stand age and negative effect of burn severity weakened as fuel size increased, with our 100-hour fuels being pretty similar across each of the strata. And one explanation for this is that these smaller 1 and 10-hour fuels are more available to combustion than these larger 100-hour fuels. We also saw a potential effect of greater 100-hour fuels in our high severity stands compared to our low severity stands, which might be a result of greater crown mortality in these high severity stands and branch drop from these killed stands that we might have not seen in the lower severity stands. So looking at the coarse fuels next, here we have our sound 1,000-hour fuels on the left and our rotten 1,000-hour fuels on the right. Sound being decay classes 1 through 3, rotten being decay classes 4 and 5. We saw strong positive effects at pre-fire stand age for both of these coarse fuel classes, but we found the effect of burn severity differed by decay class. For sound fuels, we saw a negative effect of burn severity that was only evident for the highest burned stands, whereas fuel loads for these sound coarse fuels were pretty similar between our low severity and unburned stands. And this may be due to the actual high intensity of fire that's needed to remove some of these sound fuels, that these conditions were just not generated in our low severity stands. For rotten fuels, both burn stands were more similar than unburned stands, having lower rotten fuel loads. And this is likely due to rotten fuels being more easily burned under a wider range of fire intensities compared to sound fuels. We also saw that this relationship may also just have more stochasticity in it than for sound fuels due to differences in decay rates and the actual identities of these rotten fuel structures between stands, and just generally measurements being more uncertain for rotten fuels than for sound fuels. Transitioning now from the surface up to the canopy, here we have total crown mass of branches and foliage on the left, live crown mass in the middle, and dead crown mass on the right. Overall, again, we saw a positive effect of pre-fire stand age on canopy fuel loads, with older stands having greater total, live, and dead crown mass than younger stands. This matched our expectations, again, giving these older stands having greater biomass, more complex and larger crowns, larger branches available to be representative in the canopy fuel profile. For total and live canopy fuels, we saw a negative effect of burn severity, with more high severity stands having less crown mass than both our low severity and unburned stands. This matched our expectations, giving greater combustion of fine branches and foliage in these higher severity stands. The similarities between the low severity and unburned stands is likely due to the fact that the low severity stands did not exhibit a lot of crown fire behavior, where we'd expect fire to be predominantly operating on the surface as opposed to the canopy. And for dead canopy fuel, we saw a positive effect of burn severity, with more severely burned stands having greater dead crown mass, again, due to greater overstory mortality in these high severity stands, actually converting the live biomass into dead biomass. So ultimately, these findings are contributing to a fundamental understanding of the drivers of reburn potential in this region. Understanding how reburn potential varies across burn severity, pre-fire stand age, time since fire, and under different management scenarios will help land managers develop strategies for promoting these ecological, cultural, and economic resources, as well as for mitigating fire risk using active management of these post-fire landscapes. These preliminary findings really highlight the dominance of these stand structural legacies in driving reburn potential in these western Cascadia forests. And these photos below really help illustrate this, showing just how different the post-fire environment can look like following high-severity fire, depending on the age that stand was when it burned. So noting the differences in abundance, size, arrangement, and quality of live and dead biomass between these different stands following high-severity fire is really interesting to think about how these distinct fuel profiles might suggest differences in when and under what conditions we might expect these stands to reburn. So these are some preliminary results. There are a lot of exciting future directions on the way. Some of these include refining our linear models to include additional predictor variables that may be important to fuel loads and reburn potential, as well as calculating some of those additional response variables like the different canopy fuel metrics and our live surface fuel loads. We're also planning on doing additional sampling in the Labor Day fires. Currently, we've got over 30 plots ready to go in the Lions Head, Beachy Creek, and Riverside fires to help add to these results. We're also planning on using our field data and fire behavior models, like the Fire and Fuels extension of the Forest Vegetation Simulator, to actually think about modeling potential fire behavior in these stands, and then extending that several decades into the future using simulation models, and incorporating different management scenarios into some of these model trajectories using some co-developed management options with some of our agency and tribal partners. So a lot to come, stay tuned. I'd love to chat about any insights or thoughts folks have on this. And with that, thank you for your time, and I'll take any questions if there's some time.
One question before the break.
Sure, I'll ask one. Wasn't in the Big Hollow fire, maybe someone, wasn't there a little bit of reburning from a fire this past
Yeah, so the question was about in the Big Hollow Fire, which happened in Southwest Washington, whether there was some reburning that went on this past summer and where that fits within our research there. And you're totally right, there was a small bit of reburn on kind of the southwestern edge of the fire. Thankfully, this was maybe a month after we had just finished sampling there, so in terms of our own operations, it didn't affect it at all. And it seemed like it was reburning in one of the little unburned island patches there. And so in terms of our work, it's pretty small relative to the size of the fires that we're sampling, so I don't know how it would necessarily feed into this work, but it would be really interesting to see. I think that was the Susan fire, I believe. But yeah, I think it was really situated in one of those unburned islands and kind of the puzzle piece behavior we see. Awesome, thank you.